10 is, for an artist, for a band, a really landmark number. If you're able to make 10 albums, you're doing something right. A lot of bands are lucky to make it together 10 years anymore, let alone release 10 albums. Now in metal, of course, that seems to happen a little bit more often, mainly because a lot of these bands just love what they do, and it's not about the commercialism, and it's not about all that other flib-flab or whatever. However, with Iron Maiden, the number 10 doesn't really have the chance to be symbolic, only in the sense of it was a new era. The new era, of course, being the fact that after Fear of the Dark, Bruce Dickinson left the band. Their landmark vocalist, the man that a lot of people identified this band with, alongside of the, of course, addicting guitars, the pounding bass, the trademarks that this band had established now for over a decade and change. And now they kind of had to start fresh. It's a very, very difficult thing for any band to do. Something that, of course, whenever Cliff Burton was killed in the bus accident for Metallica, they had many, many auditions before deciding on Jason Newsted. So like that, the parallel has to be drawn that somebody had to replace Bruce Dickinson. And oftentimes, whenever you're trying to replace a legend, there's some big shoes to fill. And the man that actually had to fill those shoes was former Wolfsbane vocalist Blaze Bayley. Now, Blaze is somebody that immediately, whenever you hear his voice, he definitely does not have Bruce's over-the-top theatrical range. Something that really fans of this band just clamored for and come to see as their savior, as their particular little niche of metal that nobody else had, so to speak. Blaze Bayley, on the other hand, actually had a more lower register, and whenever he were to ascend at all, it would be very mid-range. He really couldn't go to the insane heights that Bruce the Air Raid Siren Dickinson was able to attain. So whenever this album was to be released, the X Factor, that is, this is an album that a lot of people had a lot of skepticism towards. And actually, a lot of people do not give this album the respect that it deserves, because this is actually a much better album than any type of ranking that you see for it or any type of comment that people leave. They don't give it the proper chance that it actually deserves, not to mention they don't really understand it for what it was. It was obviously a transitional album for the band. This was a part of their future that they thought was going to be the long-term solution. They thought that this was going to be it. They had no idea what was going to happen at the turn of the millennium. So Blaze Bayley at this particular time was it. He was the man. He was the vocalist. And let me tell you, the guys actually put together quite an amazing record with the X Factor. It's an extremely dark record. It seems very thematic, like a lot of the albums that you've heard out of Iron Maiden from the 1980s. There's a lot of darkness, a lot of war. There's a lot of subtle nuances in there. A lot of mentions to battle. Songs such as Fortunes of War really show that. 2 a.m., Look for the Truth. There's a lot of different little subtle metaphors and nuances for it. Now, this also featured the longest song that Iron Maiden had written since Seventh Son of the Seventh Son off of the aforementioned album that I just said again. That song was just a hair under 10 minutes long, and Sign of the Cross, the very first track off of the X Factor, eclipsed 11 minutes long, thus making it the longest song that was released by Iron Maiden in the 1990s. Now, this album itself is very, very lengthy as well. At this point, it was the longest Iron Maiden album to be released. And whenever you take a look at it, you have 11 tracks and a 71-minute running time. So this actually beat Fear of the Dark, the previous record, by well over 11 minutes. This was borderlining on insane. However, this was also whenever CDs were starting to become huge, and you could hold up to 80 minutes on there. We, of course, saw that with bands such as Tool and Metallica's Load, which, of course, clocked in an absolutely insane and unbearable 78:59. Now, there's also your typical Maiden trademarks, or apparently made marks, that I was going to say, on this album as well, such as with Lord of the Flies and Man on the Edge, which were all based upon either movies or, of course, Lord of the Flies is based upon the book of the same name. But the really cool part about this particular album is that Blaze's voice actually works well with the dark atmosphere that's actually set by the music that is accompanied behind it. This is an album that is actually very light. It's an album that requires that you actually boost up the volume a little bit, which is something that's very atypical and something that a lot of fans also kind of had a problem with. But actually, this actually fit the atmosphere, it fit the mood, it created just the darkness that they were attempting to kind of go with, and that's something that actually makes the X Factor a very creepy, brooding album to listen to. Something that whenever you listen to it late at night in the dark, maybe just by candlelight, and you're trying to imagine yourself in whatever situation that Blaze is slowly speaking about in his vocals, and you have that music behind you, and you have the scene in your brain, it actually kind of works. Now, there are problems with this album, folks, don't get me wrong. There are a couple moments where Blaze Bayley was pretty much expected to be Bruce and failed. There are moments where Blaze Bayley's lyrics are a little cheesy. There are moments where Blaze Bayley utters tones that just, it makes you laugh. It honestly just seems comical to you. There is also the problem that was also shared on Fear of the Dark, where it seemed a little too long. And the reason why I say that is by the time you reach the final track, which is the Unbeliever, it just seems like it should be done. Like, you reach the Unbeliever and you're tired. You're kind of ready to go. You're ready to just move on to the next chapter of Iron Maiden's history, which so far in the 1990s really didn't seem to be all that good. But I will say this. Out of the 3 albums that were released at this point in the 1990s, this is the album that I love the most. And the reason why is because the songs that you hear on there, even though you barely hear them played live, if ever, with Bruce anymore, these are actually some really awesome tracks. This is some of the best stuff that Maiden was able to put out in the 1990s, and it came with Blaze Bayley. You really can't blame the guy for not being his predecessor. You really can't blame him for that. And if you're solely basing your judgment of the X Factor based upon the fact that it is not Bruce Dickinson that is singing these songs, then you really have to take another good, hard, long look at yourself and open up your mind to this a little bit. Bruce Dickinson is not on this album. Sorry. They're not going to magically go into the studio tomorrow and decide, well, let's re-record X Factor and Virtual 11 with Bruce. Well, when they do that, they might as well do that with Killers and the debut as well. Why not have everything have Bruce? Why not magically have Jason Newsted? I know I'm taking this Metallica metaphor way too far. Why not have Jason Newsted re-record Master of Puppets and Kill 'Em All and Ride the Lightning, since, you know, he's not Cliff. You know, he's not Cliff. But you know what? Who cares? Let's re-record those albums. Look at it for what it is. This is a landmark record. It's an awesome record. It does have its problems. It's an 8 out of 10, whereas many sites will give it like a 6.5 out of 10. Other people might actually think of it as higher. I like this record. I don't care if you don't. I hope that you do. But if you don't like this record just because it's Blaze Bayley as opposed to Bruce Dickinson, listen again with an open mind, and maybe take that little scene I posed earlier as a reason to do it. Turn out the lights, or maybe just have a candle burning. Put this album on. Crank it up a little higher. Then you maybe understand why this album is as good as it really is.